ahead and get started. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sarah Husky with 3C Ren, and welcome to the second course in the 2022 Energy Code series. Today we have Jennifer Rennick and Grant Murphy from Imbalance Green Consulting to walk us through the new 2022 Energy Code for alterations and additions for single-family residential projects. Before we dive into the content, I'll just be rolling through a couple of housekeeping slides. Next slide.
Sorry, guys, give me just a second here. My control panel is covering the forward button, but I think I fixed that. Thank you. Here we go.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, by now we're all very familiar with Zoom, but we just ask that everyone make sure they're on mute. If you'd like to verbally participate, you can raise your hand and we will call on you. But if you have a more in-depth question, we just ask that you hold those until the Q&A portion at the end of the course. If you have any clarifying questions, though, throughout, please feel free to add those questions to the chat box. Grant and myself will be monitoring the chat. Next slide. So a little bit about who we are. I am with the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, also known as 3C Ren. We are a collaborative partnership between San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, working to improve energy efficiency in our region by offering free programs and services for building professionals and households. 3C Ren is funded by ratepayer dollars, which are collected through the public goods charge found on our utility bills, and we currently offer 3 programs. The first here is our Energy Code Connect program, which serves building professionals by offering Title 24 support for residential and commercial projects. And within this program, we offer our Energy Code Coach service, which is an over-the-phone, online, and in the field support for Title 24 related questions. The next program is our building performance training, and this one serves building professionals such as architects, engineers, contractors, and real estate professionals by offering technical and soft skill trainings related to building science principles, high performance buildings, marketing, and communication techniques. And our last program is Home Energy Savings, which incentivizes contractors and helps residents save money and make their homes healthier with energy efficient upgrades through both incentives and rebates. You might see a few 3C Ren members, staff members on the training today. If you see anyone with this background, feel free to chat with them directly if you have any questions. And with that, I'll pass things over to Jennifer from Imbalance Green Consulting.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Jennifer Rennick, Imbalance Green Consulting, and Grant Murphy is here with me also from Imbalance Green Consulting. Grant's going to monitor the chat and jump in if there's any questions that are specific to the slides, or Grant's also certified energy analyst. So if there's any specific code questions that he can answer, we'll take it. Otherwise, we will direct you to the Code Coach service where we'll have time to look up those answers for you. And you will get a copy of the slides once you do your survey. So some of these slides are a little code heavy, but the thinking is that you would get a copy of this afterwards. This is course is part of a series. So we did the first one on single family, which I believe you'll get access to through the 3C Ren website. And today, February 7th, we're doing the single family additions and alterations to the existing buildings. And then coming up, we'll do accessory ADU units for the 2022 code. After that, the multifamily section. We'll hit on Cal Green and res and non-res in May, and the non-residential code also in May. So hopefully you can attend or at least get copies of this. as you learn the 2022 code. We're going to go through the kind of code update, just a reminder for everyone. And new to this code is a reorganization of multifamily, which we'll quickly review. Then we'll dive into the single family additions and alterations and march through some mandatory measures, additions, the code changes that are specific to additions and code changes that are specific to alterations. And we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. But like I said, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. So California Building Code is part of Title 24, Part 6. That's part of the whole Title 24 Building Code. And every 3 years, the California Energy Commission involves a process with the public, the industry experts, and other stakeholders, and updates the energy code. So we're currently on the 2022 code cycle, which took effect on January 1st. And the big picture goals for this latest update is to encourage heat pump technology for water heating and space heating, to establish electric ready requirements for single family homes, and for the new construction and for both commercial and non-res was to expand the PV systems and battery storage standards, as well as strengthen the ventilation standards. We're going to focus on our tri-county regional area, but I do point out other climate zones. So I noticed a few folks were from outside the area, but our tri-county region of Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo mostly encompasses climate zones 4, 5, 6, 9, and 16. So I'll have a little bit of focus on those, although I don't think we have too many projects that flow into climate zone 16, but a few. Code went into effect January 1st, 2023. And this link website to the energy.california.gov has all of the forms, documents, manuals, standards that you can download for free. And also on the 3C REN website, we have a great resource there where you can also get those documents. If you have questions about the code, 3C REN offers a great service called the Code Coach service, which you can get to it through the 3cren.org website with the Energy Code Connect, and Grant or I or others will be able to answer your Code Coach questions. So I hope you will use that resource. So the Energy Code was reorganized, and basically we had under the old code 2019 we had mandatory measures that included all the buildings. We had high-rise residential, non-residential, hotel, motel. That was kind of the non-residential section. And then we had a group of sections that were low-rise residential. And basically, the 2022 code follows that for the most part, but they pulled the multifamily buildings out of the non-res section, and they pulled the multifamily low-rise buildings out of the low-rise residential section. And now that low-rise residential section is specifically single family, which includes duplexes and townhomes, but not multifamily. Another way of looking at this for those of you who have to use the code is the way I see it is kind of a visual building tree. Is under that 2019 code, we had everything to do with low-rise residential, chapter 7, 8, 9, and then everything that wasn't low-rise residential grouped in another section. And now under the new code, we've singled out the single family residences, which are still chapter 7, 8, 9. And now we've got multifamily residents. So new chapters, chapters 10, 11, and 12. Today, we're going to focus on the single family portion of it, but specifically chapter 9 for additions and alterations. The reason we're going to focus on the additions and alterations for the energy code, or rather, I should say, the reason the energy code has a section specific to additions and alterations is that as California works towards reducing our carbon footprint and work towards energy reduction, California realizes that we have at least 50% of the single family homes and nearly 60% of our apartment complexes that were built even before the first energy code came out in 1978. So there's still a lot of building stock that could benefit from updates. And as people do alterations to their existing homes or make additions, there's going to be some mandatory measures they have to follow, and there's going to be some energy efficiency measures that they need to follow in those situations. And each of these situations, before it makes it into the code, I want to point out, have all been shown to be cost effective. Before we dive into that, as a reminder, especially if you're new to the code, the energy code has 3 sections: mandatory requirements, so that's something that all the projects have to do. There's prescriptive component package, which basically means like following a checklist. So no computer modeling involved, but if you follow all the parts on that checklist, like a recipe card, then you will comply with the prescriptive component. And under the performance method, you would use an energy model, and you could trade off some energy efficient features for other energy efficient features, as long as the overall budget of the project meets that minimum energy performance, then your building complies. If you have listened to our other presentation or been following what's going on with the 2022 code in the residential single family new construction side of it, you might have learned that we've got a new metric for source energy that's like a carbon proxy. That's true for new construction. However, under the existing buildings and additions and alterations, we still are using TDV, which is a type of cost of energy use metric. It's time dependent valuation. That metric was true in the previous code cycle, and it's true on this code cycle. But what you might, here's a visualization of what that looks like. So source energy at the bottom, yes, it includes how your energy was made, and it includes how that energy gets to the site. That's one metric that's used like a proxy for carbon, but EDR2 or additions, alterations, it still uses the time-dependent valuation, which overlaps with source energy, but it's a little bit different, and it reflects more of the cost, and that's where that time of use comes in, time-dependent. So when you use that energy. So your compliance forms under that computer model might look something like this now, where you'll see a lot of zeros. And so for the architects or the plans examiners who are looking at this, this would be completely normal for an addition or addition and alteration, where that new source energy metric is 0, meaning those columns of zeros, it's just not applicable to additions and alterations. And so what you'll be looking at is the efficiency compliance total. And if the number on the far right under the compliance margin is positive, the building passes. Plus, once this whole form is uploaded to CalCerts and you get your watermarked version of it, it's going to say if it passes or not. But if you're looking at some draft forms, this is the way it's going to appear now. So under the mandatory measures, there's been some changes in general for HVAC, heating, cooling, ventilation, and equipment efficiencies. And I wanted to point out that there are certain sections that are specific to the single family additions and alterations in that they are for small sized units. But most of these changes are going to really apply for medium and large capacity systems. And of those changes, what could potentially apply to these smaller load occupancies is higher efficiencies on air conditioning units, both split systems and package systems, and air-cooled heat pumps, both split and packaged. In the mandatory measures that are specific to residential standards, we have section 150.0, and there's a list of all the types of things the code hits on. Roof insulation, fill insulation, wall insulation, fireplaces, slab insulation, et cetera, and the list goes on. And almost all of these mandatory measures will apply to additions and alterations, with the exception, and these are some important exceptions. If you listen to our single family presentation, battery ready does not apply, does not include the electric ready requirements, and some of the ventilation and indoor air quality that's referenced, it's nuanced. The code in the additions and alterations references section 150.0 for your indoor air quality, but they're going to give you these exceptions that are specific for the addition and the alteration. And we're going to hit on a few of just the key measures that will apply to additions and alterations that you're likely to see that have been changed, specifically roof insulation, pipe and take insulation, a little bit of lighting, and we will hit on the air distribution, water heating, and some of those ventilation and indoor air quality requirements. So for the roof deck, when you have attics when you have ducts in the attic, so if your heating and cooling system requires that ducts are in the attic and you're in climate zone 4 or 8 through 16, we do have some new insulation requirements, which is either that the insulation is below the roof deck, like an R13 that's tucked up close to the rafters, like the diagram on the right, or that you have an R5 or higher exterior insulation on top of the roof deck. So in this example here, you would need just slightly over an R5, so like an R5.4 in this combination to meet that new U factor for your roof when your ducts are in the attic. There's been some slight changes on the insulation for piping and hot water tanks. And they basically eliminated, I don't know if folks, if you've been doing this for a while, there used to be a requirement that you would have to put extra insulation around your hot water tank. In some cases, that's been taken out, that's been cleaned up, so it's out of the code. And then they've made greater alignment with the actual plumbing code so that the energy code and the plumbing code are consistent. And they've clarified that all hot water piping shall be insulated. And the exception, which applies to the additions and alterations, is that if you have existing piping that is inaccessible You don't have to go back and figure out a way to insulate that, but everything that you can get to, you need to insulate it. And I included a copy here for you, what the plumbing code says, but basically for these small pipes that you're going to use for hot water, so they're less than 2 inches in diameter, the new kind of insulation rule is that that pipe insulation has to be as thick as the pipe is in diameter. For residential lighting, it's similar in that they have updated some of the requirements so that there's a greater consistency with the California electric code. Instead of the energy code saying one thing, electric code saying another. Now in the energy code, they reference the electric code for that consistency. And they've also cleaned up what's called joint appendices, JA8. And in that joint appendices part of the energy code, that's where they talked about what would be, what qualifies as a high efficacy or high efficiency type of light. And again, because the energy code references the electric code, the portion that it references, I put here in this slide for you. You'll get a copy. Makes it a little easier, especially if you use the energy code, but you're not always jumping back and forth to the plumbing code and the electric code. And basically what it says is for new construction, you would use a recessed light fixture that is IC rated. In other words, insulation cover rated. But for the additions and alterations, it clarifies that if your light fixture is not IC rated, that you would have to do something to keep insulation and other combustible materials away and off of that light fixture, such as creating a fireproof cover for it with a minimum 3-inch clearance. So back to some of the other mandatory measures. So there's been some changes and quite a bit of kind of code language update for indoor air quality ventilation. And that means how much, we're talking how much outside air is brought into the house for cleaner air and fresh outside air when the air quality outside is good. ASHRAE 62.2 continues to be the basis for this section. And we have different ways that we can show our outside air ventilation is met. It addresses the quality of the outside air, and it addresses how those systems would be field verified by a HERS rater. The change or the thing you want to know for additions and alterations is that if your addition is over 1,000 square feet, then these outdoor air requirements are applicable. The code also has updated or added language that are specific to central fan, integrated HVAC systems, kitchen and bathroom exhaust, and balanced ventilation and heat recovery, which we're going to address. And then probably the main kind of takeaway in this whole section is that kitchen and bathroom exhausts, they're applicable to all additions of any size. You still have to provide the exhaust ventilation in those spaces, even if your addition isn't triggering the outside air, fresh air ventilation requirements. For the central fan integrated ventilation system, that's a long way of saying that you want to use the heating and cooling fan system in your furnace to basically pull in outside air and provide it through the existing ductwork and provide fresh air into the house. You can do it, you're allowed to do it. However, if you have a system that is going to operate that way, there was new language to clarify how you would be allowed to do it, which requires outdoor dampers and specialized damper controls, and the ventilation fan has to be able to dial up and down and be variable. I've heard from folks in the field that it's not worth doing it, but you can, and the code now clarifies how you could do it. For mechanical exhaust for the kitchens and bathrooms, there's been some clarifying language for what you can do in these spaces. So open kitchens, for example, have to have demand controls, and they need to meet a minimum ventilation flow, or what's called a capture efficiency on their hood. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then for the enclosed kitchens and bathrooms, you can use a continuous ventilation system that is part of a heat or energy recovery balanced ventilation system. And the new kind of clarification with that is that that fan in that ERV or HRV system will have a fan efficiency of less than 1 watt per square foot. And later on in the slide deck, we have a picture of what that ERV, HRV would look like up in the ceiling. And I just want to point out that's still part of the code, because California, we have a lot of wildfires, that these fans are still to be labeled, that this switch controls the indoor air quality ventilation for the home, and leave the switch on in positions at all times, unless, key point here, the outdoor air quality is very poor. So in other words, the homeowners, the occupants, they can choose to turn that fan on and off. And the idea is that they leave it on when the air quality is good, and that way it improves the air quality inside their home. And when fires come, or you have very bad smog days, hopefully we won't anymore, but if you do, you can turn it off. For the kitchen range hoods and these other exhaust fans, there is a new section now that specifically addresses what's called capture efficiency of range hoods. So range hoods, those are the hoods, those are the fans above your cooking appliance. And new to the code is a qualification of whether that hood is actually over an electric range, which could be electric resistance or induction. But if it's all electric, there's one set of requirements. But if that hood is over a natural gas appliance, it has a higher capture efficiency or higher ventilation requirement. And that's a direct result of many of the testing over several years now that the EPA has done across a variety of homes and products. And they found that there is a significant amount of air pollution that is emitted from gas appliances. And so part of keeping your indoor air quality high is to have a better hood over the gas range. Now, in this example, you might get a hood exhaust range that has been tested to have a 55% CE or capture efficiency. That particular hood would work for an electric range where the floor area of the dwelling unit is greater than 750 square feet. So it would work for a dwelling unit that's 750 to 1,000 square feet. It would work for a house that's over 1,500 square feet. And part of this requirement too, based on dwelling unit floor area, is that all the testing showed that if you have a large house, you have a lot of volume of air. The little bit of air pollution that comes off of your appliance. Could be cooking oils, or it could be actual, air pollution from the gas appliance. All of that can go into the large volume of space, and it's essentially diluted. And so an individual occupant wouldn't be breathing in as much intensity of the air pollution in a large volume space. But the smaller the apartment, a tiny home, an efficiency apartment, or an ADU, maybe that's less than 750 square feet, for example, you'd have to go up to a higher capture efficiency, like 65% or more. And feel free, if there's any questions in the chat, or Grant, if you noticed anything, or if you think I've missed anything, jump in.
We're doing good. We had one about if we've encountered a residential CFI. I said I haven't. Have you on any of our projects?
No, I have not, but one of our colleagues has run into it a couple of times and told me that it was problematic because it was difficult for the installer to comply with all the different parts of the dampers and the fans and the variable speed. So their recommendation was do something else. But I haven't seen that being a problem myself.
Thanks.
Yeah. The mechanical exhaust for kitchens and bathrooms does require some kind of testing. So under Cal Green right now, which is part 11 of Title 24, you would test that your bath fan meets the indoor air quality, and you'd have a HERS rater come out there and test it. Under the energy code, when it comes to the kitchen exhaust system, there's two ways you can test for it. One is the installer, or you could have a HERS rater, but the installer would test out essentially that airflow of the hood was meeting the CFM, cubic feet per minute airflow necessary to meet the requirements in the table we just saw. And their equipment looks some of the equipment can look like this, where the apparatus down at the bottom is they actually put that thing up over a duct, or they have ones that can be adapted to work with your hood. One of the field inspectors told me that this equipment could cost a couple $1,000s and has to be calibrated like every couple of years or so. So that could be an issue. Or in lieu of that, you can follow a prescriptive method for duct sizing, which is now in the code. And for example, that duct system couldn't be more than 25, or it could be 25 feet in length, but not more. No more than 3 elbows. And there would have to be some specific exterior termination fittings that they would need to comply with, that has to do with the duct diameter and the hydraulic diameter, the fan outlet. So there's a prescriptive way, or you're gonna need to use airflow testing equipment. For the electric ready, there is one electric ready portion of this that's applicable, and that's if you're installing a new propane or natural gas heater as part of an addition or part of the whole project. And if you do that, if you're installing new, you do need to include space in your panel and at the wall, so that someone else who might remodel this in the future would be able to install a heat pump, an electric heating and cooling appliance. For the additions specifically, we're going to hit on a few of those same topics, but specific to additions: heating system, roof insulation, hot water, and the indoor air quality. So but before we get into that, I want to hit on a couple of exceptions that always come up with additions. And my recommendation is, if you know you're doing an addition, if you're not familiar with the energy code yourself, either ask the code coach question or get a hold of your energy consultant and double check what some of the requirements are based on the size of the addition. So for example, if you're in a climate zone where you have to deal with a cool roof and roofing that has solar rated index, solar reflective index, if that addition is 300 square feet or less, that requirement's not going to apply. If you have an addition that's 1,000 square feet or less, and say you're in one of the climate zones that requires whole house fan ventilation cooling, then that would not apply. And whole house fan ventilation cooling, not to be confused with indoor air quality, but that whole house fan ventilation cooling are for those climate zones where prescriptively they would have a fan in their ceiling of their house for the attic with a large fan that could be turned on very quickly evacuate all the air out of the house, to just pull the cold air from outside once the air temperature drops through the house and evacuate all the hot air. Once that's done, you can turn it off, or you can let it run intermittently through the night to help cool the house off. So that doesn't apply for small additions. And then, as a point of clarification, because it does come up quite a bit, we are asked, oh, I have an existing house, I'm doing an addition, do I have to do PVs and batteries now? No, the answer is no. PVs, photovoltaic, solar ready, batteries, backup batteries, all of that is either required for new construction, or in the case of batteries, is an allowable self-utilization credit you can take. But none of that's either the credit nor the requirements available for additions and alterations to or existing homes. For your additions, if you are going to be adding space heating, the code is encouraging heat pumps. So now you can choose under the prescriptive additions to replace your space heating system serving that addition with either a heat pump or a gas heating system. It used to be that the code kind of leaned towards the gas, but now with how our electric grid is cleaner, electric appliances, heat pumps are so efficient. And if you want to learn more about that, by the way, we do have other classes through 3C REN that you can take specific to the heat pumps. But you can put a new heat pump for that addition, and they make small ones, and it's a 1-to-1 unit where you mount your condensing unit outdoors, and the refrigerant line would connect to, for example, a wall-mounted indoor unit that would take care of the addition. And something like this installs within less than an hour, sometimes 2 hours, depending if you have to run electric out there. Duct extensions now got kind of a boost in insulation R value that's required for certain climate zones. So now there's a table, and basically if you're in climate zones 1, 2, 4, or 8 through 16, you need an R8. duct insulation. Some of the folks I know that do installation work, they have commented that they're just going to start using R8 duct everywhere because it's going to be a little confusing to remember that, oh, we're in climate zone 3 or 5 now or 6, and we only need R6. But in our Tri-County region, most of our climate zones are still in the R6 category. So I think it's going to depend a little bit on your installer and where they live and where they do the majority of the work. HERS rating, HERS testing is still required for duct leakage. For roofs and ceiling additions, this is kind of nuanced and it is based on square footage. So for additions that are 700 square feet or less, you can use these insulation requirements when you have a vented attic. And the basic takeaway from this is that in climate zones 2, 4, 4 is up where I am in Atascadero, North County, San Luis Obispo, 8 and 9 out part by Venturas, and climate zone 10, they basically got an upgrade now that the ceiling insulation has to be in R38 instead of the R30. For indoor air quality ventilation, even though for those of you who have to use the code quite a bit, the energy code, this is part of that section I was saying 150.0 that specifically is a mandatory measure. It's nuanced when it comes to the prescriptive requirements for additions. So I would come in and take a look at this section specifically. And probably one of the biggest clarifying changes is that junior ADUs don't trigger the indoor air quality ventilation calculation. So if you're a code official and you know they're working on a junior ADU, okay, this won't trigger it. And it won't be triggered for those additions of 1,000 square feet or less. But you'll still have the mandatory exhaust for the kitchens and bathroom and the field testing that we mentioned in the mandatory measures. And this is all part of the prescriptive requirements. And continuing with prescriptive requirements. And as a reminder, this is like following that recipe card for showing compliance so you don't have to do the energy calculation. However, these prescriptive requirements are the baseline for your computer model if you choose to go that route. If you add a second water heater to that addition, you can still choose to have a gas or propane instantaneous water heater, or it can be a heat pump water heater. And there's a couple of pictures of what a heat pump water heater looks like. The integrated type has the heat pump appliance on top of the tank of water, and the split system has an outdoor, looks like an outdoor condensing unit, like on those mini splits. And it does the heating and sends hot water to a tank that's located indoors. But what's really new, kind of a major change from the 2019 code, is that we now allowable to use a point of use electric tankless water heater for 500 square feet or less. So this would be true for small ADUs and for additions. So with this, the caveat is that it has to be point of use distribution. In other words, that electric resistance on-demand water heater has to be very close to the fixtures that are using the hot water in order to comply prescriptively. And just kind of as a side note, I did have an ADU that we were looking to use a point of use electric water heater, and we were using the computer modeling method. And I found that it was difficult to get this to comply. However, if you follow all the prescriptive components and you do it like a recipe card and you follow all the insulation requirements and everything else, this could be a good way to not have to run gas lines out to the addition for a new water heater. And it also could be a good way to have a small compact point of use water heater instead of a large heat pump water heater. The trick to doing this for having it be point of use is that you have to follow what's called table 4.4.5, and this is confirmed in plan check. It's a visual inspection. You need a HERS verification for all the pipe insulation requirements, but technically during plan check, your plans examiner would be able to look at this and see if you complied. But I know from working on this previously that a lot of these units have 3/4 inch pipe line connections coming out of the unit. And per the table, for a 3/4 inch nominal diameter pipe, you would only be allowed 5 feet of pipe length total. 3/4 inch is pretty big. So what you're going to do or look for is to have that 3/4 inch pipe manifold down right away and use your 1/2 inch pipe to get to your shower and like the 3/8 inch diameter piping or PEX piping to your sink. And ideally, if you had the small like kitchen sink or small bar sink in this ADU or addition, you would put it right back to back with that bathroom sink. And then that way you could split the difference. So in other words, you're allowed to take 5 feet of 1/2 inch piping plus 7.5, and you can round 8 feet of the 3/8 inch piping to get to the sink. And so in this example, I measured it out and it would just make it. So that's what we're looking at in terms of how close that appliance needs to be to your shower and your sink. Even better would be put that appliance inside the little cubby or closet space inside the bathroom. For the computer modeling method, now sometimes you're going to want to use this method because of the trade-offs. And where we see this is if the addition alone doesn't comply, because you are allowed to do an addition alone, you could now use in a method where you take what's existing, make some alterations to it, make some upgrades to the existing, which is now an existing and alteration, plus the addition, and model it all together. And that's what we found is often the best way to do that. And just as an example, this particular project traded off some of the required exterior continuous wall insulation by going ahead and including a very high efficiency water heater. So that was the trade-off. They hadn't intended to upgrade their water heater, but given the choice, it made a lot of sense to upgrade the water heater. And the energy code isn't really biased in the sense of saying you have to do this, you have to do that. What the energy code is saying is if yeah, you want a really high efficiency water heater, lower your water heating costs. That's great because overall it's going to save energy to the state. For the alterations, there's a few things that are specific to the alterations. A lot of times when we look at alterations, it might be a kitchen remodel, for an example. And this was a kitchen remodel we worked on where they put in new appliances. And so under the 2022 code, putting in that new appliance would trigger the requirements on the vent hood. They also added new lighting. So surface and recessed ceiling lighting. So that recessed ceiling lighting would come into play. Again, some of those requirements. And in this case, they upgraded their heating system with mini splits and concealed ducts. And all of this would be part of prescriptive alterations. And you could do that without doing an energy model and show compliance. Now, the big code change for 2022 is that there are some new sections, specifically section J that has to do with the ceilings for the vented attics, section L and section M, which has to do with your mechanical indoor air ventilation requirements, i.e. kitchen hoods and the overall energy heat recovery or energy recovery systems. And then N, exterior doors. We're not going to hit on the exterior doors. That section's pretty self-explanatory. But we are going to talk a little bit about the ducts because I think this will come into play for the plans examiners and the builders. I don't know if the architects will notice the difference, but in the old previous code, if you extended your duct system, so let's say you did this alteration and now you needed to extend the length of ducts as part of the whole project, you could previously extend it 40 feet before triggering any of these requirements. Now it's 25 feet. And it used to be that you could test that duct leakage to 15%. Now it's got to be 10%. And it used to be that you could leak air to the outside at 10%. Now that's dropped to 7%. And then, as we mentioned previously, it does trigger the duct insulation, and it's been increased to R8 for a lot of the climate zones. And the reason that all of this can come into play is because these upgrades have been shown to be cost effective when the CEC has done their analysis on cost to do the work as opposed to cost of energy saved. Also, typically, ductless electric resistance wall heaters or those types of heaters were not allowed. However, with alterations, you can keep your electric resistance heating if you already have it. And there are some exceptions that allow you to use it. And a lot of those exceptions have to do with what is happening with the climate zone. So if you're located in climate zone 7 or 15, it's okay. So we do have some climate zone 7s down in Ventura, Santa Barbara area. And if the existing system is already electric resistance and you're not replacing or now installing a new cooling system. So if it's heating only for those mild climate zones, you can still do this. So I think that's important that they clarified where you can use it now. And for the roofs on the alterations, there's been some code updates and it's nuanced on where you can have the solar reflectance versus insulation trade-off. In other words, for new construction, especially, you might increase your ceiling insulation to not have to deal with having a certain type of roofing material with an age solar reflectance. Same with the alterations. There are those trade-offs. And this kicks in when 50% of your roof is being replaced, 50% or more as part of the alteration. But it's nuanced and it's based on how steep your roof is and based on your climate zone. So I would say that if you know you're going to be doing a roof replacement as part of the requirement, it come back into this section of the code and just double check what the requirements are going to be for your climate zone. One of the key things that kind of hit me was climate zone 4 up here in North County. It's hotter than a lot of the other parts of our Tri-County regional area. And if I had a low slope roof and I was replacing it, I would have to consider doing an R14 continuous exterior insulation on that roof. So that's pretty major code change. And that means a couple inches of foam now on that new roof. So it's worth taking a look at this if you're doing a re-roof. For the ceilings of vented attics, so this diagram might look a little familiar. So it was triggered under the mandatory measures, and it's specifically referenced in the prescriptive changes and the alterations of ceilings of vented attics, where you have existing recessed downlights. So rather than having to replace all those downlights, you can either buy a manufactured cover that's fireproof, or you can make one out of drywall, then use special fireproof sealant. As long as you now comply with keeping all of that insulation and keeping the combustibles away from that existing fixture. The reason this new section is in there and triggered is because the altered ceilings now in many climate zones, again, I'm in climate zone 4, this one's triggered North County, but climate zone 5, not triggered. And climate zone 7, not triggered. So we've got a blend of climate zones in our Tri-County regional area that are going to trigger this. But if you're in climate zone 4, you'd have to insulate that ceiling to an R49. And it's not a typo. That is higher than the new construction kind of prescriptive requirement that we reviewed that was an R38. And the thinking and the cost effectiveness reasoning behind this is that that R49 in that ceiling is an easy way to get a lot of insulation in alteration where it can have a great benefit, because there's probably not a chance that you're going to really be able to re-insulate the walls. And especially like in my older house, I just have 2x4 walls. So there's no way in an alteration project I would go back and be able to do anything better in those 2x4 walls than probably what's already there. Even if I could tear off all the drywall. So the thinking is get better insulation in the attic because it's a large surface area. There is an exception for a few of the milder climate zones, and that's if you already have existing R19 insulation. But that's only key for just a couple of climate zones. For the alterations, again, ceilings of vented attics, new section specifically talks about air sealing. And this is a kind of image from the Department of Energy website, and they've got US Department of Energy has some really great resources for air sealing and how to do it and what it looks like and specifically what is required. And again, this thinking is that air sealing is very cost effective and not a difficult thing to do in many projects. So again, if you're in climate zone 4, like I am, or climate zone 9 down in Ventura, you would also include the air sealing. And there is some exceptions. If you have that existing R19 insulation in there already, you don't have to take out your insulation to do the air sealing. But if you're working on an existing home that was built before the energy code came in, there's chances that there is no insulation in that attic at all. And then the other kind of exception is if there's asbestos or knob and tube wiring. If the house is that old, you don't have to disturb those things and do this. Here is the picture of the alterations, ventilation, indoor air quality system that I was mentioning that shows what a heat recovery ventilation would look like, or what that ductwork looks like. And both for the new construction, part of mandatory measures as a way to comply, and alterations, you can use a dedicated balanced indoor air quality ventilation system with heat recovery and have compliance with the indoor air quality of your enclosed bathrooms and kitchens. It's okay to use this kind of whole house indoor air quality ventilation system. And what this picture is showing the ceiling, looking up into the ceiling with trusses, and that's 3-inch ductwork that's run to small diffuser boxes, and it's got a manifold and all the ductwork. So you've got a supply and a return. And in this case, this all went back to a garage where they had the main heat exchanger. And basically it pulls air out of your house and exchanges heat with the cold air that it's pulling from outdoors, so that it tempers the incoming air so it's not so cold when it reaches your house. And the exhaust air is allowed to go out and do its thing with fresh air coming in, and it conserves heat. So this can be very effective for especially colder climate zones. One thing to know, kind of point out on this, is that if you are doing an entirely new or complete replacement system, the ventilation system, this can be a good way to go. It depends on to the extent of your remodel. And what is considered a complete replacement is if 75% of that duct and associated materials are replaced. And if that is true, that whole system needs to comply with all those mandatory measures that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. And then the same is true for the fan replacements, the fan alterations, air filters, bathroom exhaust, et cetera, when you're replacing that whole system. Okay, if you have any questions, we will take them, but also if you have questions afterwards or as you're working on your projects, we have an energy code coach service. It's a completely free service to plans examiners, to any of the jurisdictions, to homeowners, to builders, to installers, to architects. If you live in California, essentially, right, Sarah? You live in our area. Sarah's nodding. Yeah.
In our Tri-County region. Yeah, so counties of San Luis, Santa Barbara, and Ventura.
Yes. You're welcome to give us a question about the energy code, and we will work with you to get that question answered and to demystify the code and just help you navigate what is required under the new 2022 code. Let's see, we'll take questions, and Sarah is going to give everyone a kind of heads up on what's coming up on the courses and a little bit more about our 3C rent.
Yeah, so before we dive into the Q&A portion, just a couple of closing items. There are continuing education units available for today's course. We have both AIA and ICC, and the health safety units for the AIA credits are approved, so you'll get credit for those. And coming to your inbox will be the slides, the recording, and a survey. Please take it. It helps us inform future content and courses. And as far as upcoming courses, we have a in-person zero net carbon design. It's part 1 is in 2 days. It's in San Luis Obispo, and part 2 is on March 9th. And then we have a few more courses coming up. And then the next in our 2022 Energy Code series is on March 8th. It's for accessory dwelling units. So yeah, so with that, we'll just open it up to questions. Feel free to add them into the chat or unmute yourself and can ask your question.
First one here, Jennifer, from Dan. If I designed an addition that meets all prescriptive measures, do I need to run that past my energy consultant, or can I just submit the plans with the prescriptive measures detailed?
Well, you need to still fill out the CF1R forms that are applicable to your project. So even if it's prescriptive, if filling out those forms is problematic for you, I would just have your energy consultant fill out the forms prescriptively and be done. Grant, well, you do a lot of this work. What would you say?
I would say the same thing. Yeah. If the forms are supposed to be easy, but they're not always the most friendly. So sometimes it is best to hand that to somebody who spends time with them.
Right, but you still have to submit the forms as part of your project. Yeah.
Dan had another one. A radiant barrier is required in climate zone 5. If spray foam is used under the roof deck, does that negate the required radiant barrier?
Let's see. I would have to look it up, Grant.
I would say just, doesn't the radiant barrier need 1 inch?
Oh, you're talking about radiant barrier needing an air gap, and you were talking about the radiant barrier maybe being bonded to the underside of your sheathing, for example. So, okay, so if you're using a radiant barrier that's bonded to the plywood sheathing or OSB sheathing as a product, and you're counting on that radiant barrier working for your attic, and then you've got your ceiling insulation, you do not want to use spray foam on that because it'll ruin the ability for the radiant barrier to do its work. However, I have seen installations where people have used like below deck insulation and then stapled up a radiant barrier underneath that. But typically you're going to do an assembly that's like one way or the other. And where I was a little hung up was like, oh, 1-inch foam, is that enough? And so it's going to be a combination of what's required and if you're doing a high performance attic or not. So it's a little nuanced, but you're going to want to use a whole assembly that makes sense. So spray foaming over your radiant barrier, no, that's not going to work. And it's true, your radiant barrier needs an air gap in order to work as a radiant barrier. I hope that helped clarify. But you can, that would be a good one for a code coach question if you have a specific, a whole specific assembly that you're contemplating and wanting to know if it meets the prescriptive measures now for that climate zone.
Great.
And we could, if there's any slides too that seemed a little thick or you had questions about it or the wanting to know significance of it, I can happily flip back through the slide deck and we can get any of your questions answered. Or if some of you want to unmute and ask questions or just say hi, you're welcome to do that too.
Hey, this is Dan again, and I just going back to that question real quick.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm thinking about doing, you know, like a vaulted ceiling and
Yes.
using the spray foam, so I don't have to vent because of wildfire requirements. But is there a radiant barrier that's going to work in that situation? I mean, is there something? Do I have to do some sort of roof buildup on top of the roof deck and get a radiant barrier in there, or?
If for that assembly, how I would approach it is do the spray foam for your unvented attic, unvented like cathedral roof assembly. Make sure that you either are going to do like a flash and bat situation or do continuous exterior insulation over the top of the roof deck. And then you would, if you want the effect of a radiant barrier, you could use a roofing material that has a higher solar reflectance index. But you wouldn't have to go in and like use radiant barrier that's attached to the plywood or staple radiant barrier. That's incongruent with that assembly that you're trying to create. So if your goal is to just meet compliance, no, you, in that sense, you don't have a radiant barrier requirement. But if your goal is to also shed extra heat from transferring through that roof, then use a roof material that's either got the high solar reflectance index, or you can also put that roofing material up on sleepers and just let the roofing material itself not be attached and give it a little bit of breathing room, so to speak.
Thank you.
We had another one, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Judy asks for clarification. The minimum bathroom exhaust fan CFM must be HERS measured and verified, but range hood exhaust CFM does not. Is that correct?
Yeah, Cal Green requires that you look at the bath fans, and I believe that's still in the requirement for this code cycle. And new to the code is the range hood exhaust verification. And that part in the energy code, it says that the installer can also test out. But I think that there's no reason why you also, the builder couldn't have their HERS rater also test the kitchen hood.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that clarified.
Yeah, and if there are any more questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or enter it in the chat. But if not, we could end it early. Thank you, Jennifer, for a great presentation, and thank you to Grant for helping support. We'll stay on for a few minutes if there's still any questions, but feel free to sign off.
Well, I'm glad we had a good turnout.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Grant.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, actually, I did have a question. Will you be emailing the slides, a separate email?
Yes, I'll be
Okay.
sending out an email. It will have a link to the recording and a copy of the slides.
And was that sent after the last one we did on the single family dwelling?
Yes,
Did it come-
yes, it was.
Curious if someone missed it, can they go back and or contact you and do the survey still and get a copy if they were part of the single family?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. The recording is currently on our on-demand page. But if yeah, you had registered and didn't see the email, you can reach out to me, or I can also, yeah, I can take a look and get you that information.
Okay, I'll check it.
Yeah, is your email in the chat?
I can put it there.
Yeah, I think I noticed it's helpful. I've gotten feedback from folks saying that when they get a copy of the slides, it's helpful because I know we're trying to make it thorough, so it's kind of code heavy. So it's like cliff notes to the code that can help folks,
Definitely.
but it's hard to memorize all this stuff. Oh, gee, it only's taken me, what, 30 years?
Yeah, and Jonathan, I can look and see if you were in our listserv, and I can forward you the email if not.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and end in the course. Thank you all again for joining, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye, all.
Bye, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, everyone.